everyone, welcome to Watch It Paint It. Today we're painting Algus from Masmorra by Simon. We've not painted an Arcadia Quest model in a while, but on Patreon we voted last month on the models to paint this month. Massive Darkness massively won, but the Arcadia Quest universe was sort of second, so I thought I'd paint one, and Jean requested Algus, so that's why we're painting him today. If you fancy joining in the voting fun, the votes for October are currently up on Patreon, and we're picking the models to do next month, and you can join from as little as $1, and I really appreciate the support. Let's get on with some painting. So we're going to start with Royal Purple and Squid Pink mixed 50-50, and that's to do the light purpley pink that you can find on Albus's robes, so that material that's covering the front, as well as the sleeves, the edging on the sleeves, and that rim around his hat there. All the paints I use during this tutorial can be found in the description below this video, in case I'm going a bit too quick on showing you the paints there. So I'm using the Regiment brush, and I'll be using the Regiment brush for at least 90%, if not all, of the base coat. So after the light pink's done, I'm moving on to the darker purple, and this is using just neat Royal Purple by Vallejo, and this is to paint in all the other parts of his robe there. So the sleeves, the actual body part of the robe, the inside of the sleeves as well. Taking some care there because I have primed this model in Barbarian flesh by the Army Painter to begin with, and that gives it that survivor skin tone, so I don't need to paint any of his flesh colour, so I do need to be careful around his face and his arms, as you can see there, just taking a little bit of time when I'm putting the paint up to his wrists or his elbows. Yes, let's say elbows. They're not his hands in the end of his sleeves, he has got little arms. So applying the paint to the hat, as I mentioned, being a little careful around the band that runs along the hat there, as I've already painted that in the lighter colour, and then just painting the top of the hat as well in this Royal Purple. I hope you really like purple if you're doing this model, because there's a lot of purple going on. But it does add a little bit of colour. The wizards are more exciting than these drab warrior sorts, so they've got that going for them. I'm moving on to Brainmatter Beige next. The slightly off white by the Army Painter from the Zombicide set, and I'm using, this is the detail brush part, and this is to paint in his eyeballs. So I've slowed the video down here because it doesn't take very long, and I wanted to be able to see what I was doing carefully here. I'm just applying a thin, watered down, even coat of this Brainmatter Beige to his eye. I'll probably do another coat off camera as well, just to bring out the colour a bit better, a bit stronger. Speeding up to do the next eye. I'm also going to paint in his teeth while I'm there, in the same colour. I'm just catching all those top teeth there. I'm going to take the Survivor shader. This is the black shader by the Army Painter, and this is to get that sort of outlining on the eyes that I use on the chibi models. So I'm just applying, again with the detail brush here, just a very precise amount of this shader. So I'm pushing it away from the eyeball out into the recesses of his eyes, just to give him this black outlining. So I'm getting a little bit more on my brush now. So I'm pressing it into the centre because I don't mind it going into his pupil, because I'm going to be painting that black later anyway. But other than that, I am pushing this paint, hopefully you can see that, away from his eyeball into the sort of socket area behind the eyeball. I'm also going to, while I'm here, just do the same to the teeth, as I've already painted those, and the tongue was painted with the Squid Pink while I was going round his robes. Also, I out of camera coloured in his staff gem with the same 50-50 mix of the purple and the Squid Pink. I'm going to be using Filthy Soup, back to the Regiment brush. Filthy Soup by the Army Painter, and this is to do his hair, so that's his beard and the hair at the back under his hat. Hopefully you can see that there. Just a quick coating, just being careful not to catch any of the areas I've already painted, and his face, which was primed in the Barbarian flesh colour, which is the colour I want it to be anyway, and then just switching down to the Regiment brush there, just to get closer to his face without accidentally getting any grey on his skin area. So that's his hair just about done there, and we're going to move on to Leather Brown. This is by the Army Painter. It's the Zombicide set again, and still with the detail brush here, I'm going to paint on the front of his belt, as well as the cover to the book that he's carrying, his little wizard's book. Every wizard needs a spell book, obviously, so that's attached to his belt there. I'm going to be using the Regiment brush just to do the back of his belt. It's a larger area, it's much easier to get the brush in without accidentally catching any of these areas I've already painted. And the same applies with the staff. That's a nice open area, fairly easy to get to. Just being extra careful around his hand there, and just applying this brown around his whole staff, being careful around the gem. I'm going to be using Vallejo's gold from the model set It's quite a bright gold to start with. I'm going to be shading it later, so I was starting it off as bright as I could. And this is to do that sort of medallion that's found on his belt, his belt buckle perhaps. And then all of the trim that's all around this wizard. There is a lot of gold, and gold's quite difficult to apply, so it may take a couple of coats. And I think this is just about taking your time. Try not to get too fatigued, especially if you're leaning over in a funny position trying to film all of this. So I'm using the detail brush, and I'm just applying line after line of gold, being very, very careful not to get this on any of the areas I've painted already. And yeah, there's a lot of gold trim, so hopefully you're as much of a fan as gold as you are of purple if you're doing this, and quite freehand almost. I mean, there is detail in the model. There is an area to paint this gold trim around his sleeves on, but it's fairly difficult to hit, and I was taking my time, and I was still messing up a little bit, but we'll tidy that up when it gets to the highlighting, so it's not too big a deal here. A lot of it will be covered with the shade. It'll be darkened down, it'll be quite close, difficult to tell whether it's purple or gold anyway, and then once you start highlighting up, it will neaten up the job, whatever you do. So just there, I don't know if you saw, I'd accidentally cut his sleeve with some of the gold, and I cleared that up by flooding the area with water. So I cleaned my brush, got a droplet of water on the brush, and just wiped it off, got it nice and runny, and then wiped it onto a paper towel. So that's the base coat completely done. It took 40 minutes. It's not, I don't think that was too bad. This model is surprisingly time consuming. It's a big chunky model. There's a lot of area to cover. So we're going to be going on to washing. I've attached it to my nice holder there by Quickdraw Supplies. That can be found in the description below if anyone's interested in seeing them. And then we're using the light wash by the Army Painter, and this is to do all of his skin. It's 100% the wrong wash. I meant to use my flesh wash, and I didn't even notice until right now that I used the wrong wash. I did think it was quite light when I was highlighting up the model, but didn't notice the bottles look nearly identical. So if you're following along with this tutorial and you've got the flesh wash, I advise use that one instead. We're now on to shading the wood and the gold, and we're using the Survivor shader here, the black shader by the Army Painter, and we're just applying this with the regiment brush. Oh, we're also going to do his beard. Forgot about the grey. So the grey, the brown, and the gold, and this is all going to get a nice coating using the black wash by the Army Painter. Don't forget his hair under his hat at the back. Get some nice shade in there. That would probably be the darkest area on him. We're going to use Toxic Shader. This is a sort of purple shader by the Army Painter from the Zombicide sets, and this is to do all of the purple and pink areas of the model. So this is the majority of the shading, and I think it gives a nice shadow effect, seeing as we've used purple and then we're just shading it with purple. It's just darkening all those colours we've painted on so far, making sure it gets in all of the recesses there. Again, this model has got a lot of surface area. It's fairly time consuming to do all the painting. We're going back to Brainmatter Beige now the shading's done. We're going to start highlighting, and we're going to start with his eyeballs there. So just painting back in the whites of his eyes from anywhere that the shader, when I was getting the black around his eyes, was left on. So I also did his teeth while I was here, and the pages on these books. I'm going to use Dead Black. This is just a straight black by the Army Painter, and this is just a dot in those pupils. They already had some of the shade inside the pupils, so they were noticeable, but I wanted them to stand out a lot stronger. So hopefully you can see they certainly do that now. I'm going to be using Survivor Skin, just neat, and this is just to put the colour back in on his flesh. So all of his fingers. I'm going to catch some on his fingernails as well, and some of his arms, especially where some of that purple wash I'd accidentally caught on his hands. So I really wanted to paint his hands back to being skin coloured and not purple coloured. He is not an alien. I'm also going to catch the palm, so all the raised parts of his palm. I'm going to do his lips, all the raised parts of his nose. He's got a little crinkle, a little cute crinkle above his nose, and I'm going to catch his wrinkles and his eye bottoms. Make sure you get some on his eye bottoms. I'm then going to take the Brainmatter Beige and the Survivor Skin. I'm going to mix these 50-50 using my detail brush here, and just painting the very most raised area, so the tips of his nose here, his finger, down the centre of sort of his fingers, his fingernails, and around his eyes as well there. So hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to catch all the tips of his fingers as well, because they're sort of facing you as you're playing. So that's the skin not completely done. I'm going to use Filthy Suit, just neat, and I'm using the detail brush again here. I'm just going to paint back in all the strands of his hair, including his eyebrows, all of his little whiskers on his beard, just basically anywhere that the shaders was left on the flat surfaces. So I'm just painting back in the original base colour where the shaders sort of darkened it a bit more than I wanted to. I just want to leave that the shader in the recesses really. So hopefully you can see that it's looking quite realistic, quite 3D, as though the light is actually hitting it. And I'm applying quite thick lines of this colour because there will be another highlight, as we're about to see. Brainmatter Beige and Filthy Suit mixed 50-50, and this time I'm just going to apply it to the very edges of all of those strands of hairs, so just along the sort of moustache, along his mouth area, and then sort of a line down each strand of hair. Hopefully you could see that, sort of in the middle of where we just previously painted on the colour again. We're going to use Toxic Boils, which is the Army Painter's purpley pink, and this is just to colour back in the base colour of the squid pink and the purple mixed together 50-50 is about the same as this Toxic Boil really. I just didn't have this to hand at the time when I was doing it, so I'm trying to leave the shade again in all the recesses around this purpley pink area, and I'm just taking my time using my detail brush and trying to paint back in some of that base colour. So I guess at this point this is when other YouTubers might use some music, and that's probably something maybe I should do. Do you guys think I should be playing music in these videos? Because at this point there's a lot of video to watch. I could just cut it, I could add some music, or I could just try and keep rambling, but sometimes there's just way too much painting to ramble over. What do you think? Let us know in the comments there. So taking back out the Royal Purple by Vallejo, I'm just going to be painting back in that base colour, leaving all the folds in his robes and the darkest areas of the inside of his sleeves there just shaded. But this is just to paint back on all the raised parts of his robe. Hopefully you could see that most of his sleeves quite flat, so I painted that back in. And then along his hat, I'm going to paint the edges, leaving the bit in the folds just shaded. Hopefully you could just about see that. It's just slightly darker than this, and I think it gives a realistic shadow effect, as you can imagine light wouldn't be passing through those folds in either side of his hat. I'm painting the flat part of the top of his hat as well there. I'm going to mix Toxic Boils 50-50 in with that, and then I'm going to take my detail brush, so I'm sizing down here. I'm going to start painting this in along all the areas I've just painted, but inside that Royal Purple base coat that I painted back in. So it's adding sort of like a light spot to everything, making sure I paint all the ridges and along the front and back of his hat there as well, and then the ridges along the centre part of his hat and the very top little point there. I then mixed in another sort of 50%, so this is 25% Royal Purple now and 75% of that Toxic Boil pink, and this is to do the final highlight. And I'm just going to paint along every sort of ridge of his hat, all the ridges of his robe, which is really only on the front and the back, and then the rim of his hat there as well. And hopefully you can see this is just tying it together, giving it a nice poppy look and feel to it. Toxic Boils once more, and this is to do the gem. We're highlighting up the gem now on his staff, so I'm just painting this in neat. I'm trying to leave the shaded area in all the cracks along this gem, so leaving that a bit darker, not forgetting to do the back of it as well. Hopefully trying to get a realistic-ish gem look and feel. I decided I wasn't happy enough with this blend between the light purple and this light pink, so I created my own glaze. So that's taking Glaze Medium and the Royal Purple and mixing that about 33% of the Royal Purple to 66% of the glaze, and then applying this glaze to all of these light purpley areas, and then cleaning my brush, drying it, and trying to remove a little bit of this glaze because it was getting too much on it, but I wanted to make sure it got a nice coverage. But then I'm just, after that starts to dry a teeny tiny bit, I'm removing it as well and just lightening it back up. But it's also sort of naturally highlighting it as well, because the paint's coming off much easier on the raised parts of all of these areas. So hopefully you can see, I think that's adding a much better light purple there, a much better blend as well. The colours now blend a lot more naturally and looks a lot more realistic. So next I'm highlighting up the browns, and I'm just taking Leather Brown again. I'm just going to apply one highlight and just freshen up the base colour again, just on all the flat parts of the staff and his book and his belt. So just taking my time, and I'm using the detail brush along the back of his belt. I'm just going to catch the top and the bottom and just remove some of the stains created by the wash, that where it just sat on the flat surface. So that's all I've really done on the highlighting of the brown. I quite liked him having a dark looking staff, and I just wanted to remove some of the wash. So next is highlighting back up the gold, and I'm using polished gold by Vallejo here. I'm going to use the detail brush, and it's just a matter again of taking your time, being careful, and trying to not catch any of the areas I've now finished painting. So this is going to take some time. It's going to be worth it. This is going to be the final touch, and it's going to really tidy up any of the messes between the two colours. When we were doing the base coat, this is going to start bringing out which part's actually gold and which parts are his robes, because after adding that toxic shader, the purple shader, that's really dulled down the gold. It looks quite purple on his sleeves, for instance. So this is your time to really shine and bring out the highlight of that gold. So once again, I think this is the point where, do I need some music? Is that something I should be doing, or should I be cutting away? What would you guys prefer to see? Can you let me know in the comments, and I'll start thinking about it when I'm doing a video with large areas of the exact same colour with very little to say about it. Along the edges of his sleeves, having just said that, I am trying to use the side of my paintbrush there and just sort of scraping the paint onto the sleeve. That's the easiest way of painting that. Whereas back to the bit around his hat, I'm just having to get a tiny bit on my paintbrush and just be very, very careful not to catch either side of those two purples. There's a bit of music. And then we're on to the base. Not done this for a long time, but with all my Arcadia Quest models, I paint the base Mournfang Brown by Citadel. So I'm just applying a nice quick thin even coat of this Mournfang Brown all the way around his tiny base. He's a huge model, there's very little base there. While that's drying, I'm going to take Brainmatter Beige and just paint on some more light sort of effect, hitting that crystal, trying to make it as though trying to turn it into a crystal, really. I'm going to take gloss varnish, and I'm going to varnish up his eyes so they're a little bit shiny, a little bit more realistic. I'm also going to varnish that crystal to try and make it look like a crystal once more. And finally, once that base of the Mournfang Brown is dry, I'm going to use Agrelin Earth, and I'm going to paint this all around the top part of the base, even smaller areas. So I'm really taking my time. I've got as little as possible on the brush, really. I'm just trying to get the colour in there to begin with, and then once there's some colour there, I'll be able to get extra on top of that, because you want a nice thick coat of this so it will crack as it dries. Not that you'll be able to see that very easily on this model because there's so little base to it, but I just wanted to keep all of my Masmorra, all of my Arcadia Quests models consistent. So we've finished. That's Algus completely done. It took 1 hour and 29 minutes, which isn't too bad. A little bit tedious, as I mentioned, there's a lot of surface area, so it takes quite a long time to paint this model, as you've just seen from the video. There's a lot of just doing the same, but I'm fairly happy with that. I think he looks great. I think his beard looks fantastic. That's one of the best beards I've done. It's probably the biggest beard I've done. It's quite a large model, so it's pretty easy to do. So as I mentioned at the start, if you'd like some input on the models we paint next month, come and check out the Patreon. You can leave any requests in the comments below. I do look at them, and I do add them to the list that we'll vote for in the future. And also, what do you think about adding music to the video? Let me know in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video as well. Thank you very much for watching.